Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is, I watched, I don't want to say watch because that's not quite what I did. I had to fast forward through it. I watched parts of the Midnight Sky, depressing, melancholy, pointless. That's a George Clooney movie, right? That he stars in and directs, and Netflix does this where they'll give somebody a bunch of money, like a big time star, and they'll make a personal movie. And this is one of the most depressing, sort of pointless, lifeless. Life has no point, which is all the theme of all George Clooney movies. And I'll demonstrate this in a bit. I'll come back to this point. But it starts off here in Antarctica at an observatory station, which is, a very depressing, lifeless place in itself, right? And so this is the opening scene. It's just dark, and there's nothing, it's just devoid of life. The place is empty, right? They're showing you how, quiet it is there. And then they show you Anubis, the god of death, the Egyptian god of death, right? We'll come back to Anubis more because there's another part with Anubis here. So here it says 3 weeks after the event. So this is the beginning of the movie. They're trying to set the tone. The event is the wiping out of all life on planet Earth, except for this guy, George Clooney. He's the last man standing.
I could race to see who could die first. Terminal patient outlives the rest of humanity.
So then they establish he's a terminal patient that outlives the rest of humanity because he's not willing to leave Antarctica because he has no life. He has no home. The guy asks him, well, why don't you go home? And he's like, well, this is as much as home as anything else is. And so he's dying. He has some sort of terminal disease. And everyone else is already dead on planet Earth. And so that's how they bring you into the movie here. In the aftermath of a global catastrophe, a lone scientist in the Antarctic races to contact a crew of astronauts with a warning not to return to Earth because the Earth is effed, right? And so this is the theme of the movie. So you take a dead place, a place where there's, nothing really lives there. I mean, you got penguins and whatever it is, right? Is that Antarctica or the other place, North Pole? Antarctica, I think, is the South Pole. I don't know. Who knows? Who cares? But it is the most melancholy and depressing and just life has no point movie in a series of movies. These are George Clooney's movies. He has this thing about life having no point. Life is pointless. There's just no. His movies have vague sort of character development, people who are lost and clueless, and that life is pointless. It's depressing. I'll go through some of his movies just to demonstrate this in a moment.
For you, I guess that's here. As good a place as any.
That's because he doesn't have a home, doesn't have a life, doesn't have a family, doesn't have anybody who loves him. And so this is him eating alone. And this is the music that's playing, right? There's a woman screaming, and that's some mom who, her daughter, she's lost her daughter, and that's going to come into play here. But her daughter is, someone else says that she already got on a plane with somebody else, and she's fine. But all these people are going to places that are already wrecked by nuclear war, right? So nobody's going anyplace safe. This is the only safe place. Everybody's leaving it and going home to die with their family and loved ones. Except for him, he chose the slow terminal death of whatever disease he has to be alone in this already desert-like, cold, frigid area where you can't go outside, And it's typical George Clooney stuff. So here's the woman. She's lost her daughter, but she gets reassured by another woman. I should say here, I'm in the editing process. I should say spoiler alert. Because I'm not only going to spoil alert this movie, I'm going to spoiler alert multiple movies of George Clooney and talk about the endings and other things. I mean, this movie to me isn't worth watching, at least if you don't want to get your life force sucked out of you. Anyways, back to our regularly scheduled programming. And so then this happens. George Clooney picks up Anubis, so you can see here. He's got Anubis, and he is putting Anubis in a box. Or I guess, I don't know, trash for some reason. He places Anubis here, and let's talk about Anubis for a little bit. Anubis, also called Anoop, Egyptian god of the dead, represented as a jackal or a figure of a man with the head of a jackal. And so Anubis had he was in the place of embalming. He is the god of embalming. It also, he's the conductors of souls, and he takes souls to the dark world, whatever it is, Hades, whatever they call it, right? And so Anubis is kind of a foreboding creature, and we know that Snoop Dogg I've talked about that. He's been compared to Anubis. He's played I think he put on a dog's head in some kind of Adidas commercial. And Snoop Dogg is somebody who represents Anubis in our world. Then of course we have the Anubis at the Denver airport. There's this giant Anubis statue, and of course the weird paintings in the Denver airport and the crazy looking horse. But they've put the god of death right next to an airport. There's the crazy looking horse there. I mean, so many people have covered Anubis, but there he is with a suitcase, but this is Anubis, right? And so George Clooney, you could say that he represents Anubis with his movies. George Clooney's movies have a death, a melancholy death and depressing sort of energy to him. And he's like Anubis in a Hollywood star form. So this is an article in Deadline, an interview with George Clooney about this movie, Midnight Sky, and we'll get back to it. I'll go through, various important scenes. Oddly, it also offers hope, and it doesn't offer hope. There's only two people left alive: a pregnant woman, his daughter, as you'll find out. Spoiler alert. And it's just it's not hopeful. It's got that melancholy music. Life is pointless. And then he comes and says this here. But in general, this is a conversation about if you play out all this hatred that we see, not just in the United States, all around the world, between all these sorts of authoritarian figures, and you play that out for the next 30 years, this is not all unconventional. It's not impossible. It's not science fiction that we could destroy the world. And, like what? Like, this movie doesn't offer, sort of hope or any sort of... it's like this stuff is all inevitable, right? This is George Clooney's sort of... George Clooney is a player. So, if you know about Council of Foreign Relations, it's all this group of various powerful and, wealthy... the power behind the throne guys, the Bilderberg guys, the, Eyes Wide Shut guys, and George Clooney's a member. There's a lot of Hollywood celebrities that are just pawns, but some of them are players, and George Clooney's a player. And like I said, his movies are just depressing and pointless, and he was awarded a lifetime membership to the Council on Foreign Relations. And so he is, big time into this. Another person was Angelina Jolie, who got a seat at the table here and is a part of the club, right? Whereas a lot of the actors and, A-list celebrities are not. So this is from George Clooney's movie Solaris, which I never got through. It plays this melancholy music. It's another sort of science fiction movie where they're out. His wife is dying, and it's just, they have these dramatic scenes and, conversations with, this is the music that they play throughout the movie. That's the whole movie. That music, long dramatic scenes with no dialogue, just walking around, in the dark. This is him just, I don't know what he's doing here.
Orion. No. Who am I then?
Just like this pointlessness. I didn't know how the movie ends, so I looked it up. At the end, he decides not to go back to Earth, is transformed by Solaris into a clone creature, and lives a life of blissful illusion with the rare creature. Rare is his wife, right? And so it's this, it's just, the feeling that you get from his movies is just life is pointless. Why even try? And it's just all this depressed, the pointlessness of life. And so there was this Up in the Air movie where George Clooney's job is to fire people. It was billed as a comedy, and it was an Oscar-nominated movie. And this was his one goal was to get like 10,000 miles, like be in the 10,000 mile club for a certain, frequent flyer miles. And that's what he achieves at the end of the movie. And it's another one of these melancholy, depressed, I guess there's a few sort of comic scenes. But everyone in the movie, it's just drab. Like his movies are very drab.
Well, I don't have a lot of hope, and I really don't know when it's going to get better. There's a lot of people unemployed.
This is one of the people that he fires, right? And so this is just, typical George Clooney movies. This is the kind of music they play, right? It's just this melancholy, depressed music and long scenes of dramatic posing and, staring off into, this case, the endless possibilities of where to fly around the world.
Spouses will ask about their day, and tonight they'll sleep. The star.
And so just this, dramatic voiceover in the back with the music playing. This is a movie called The Descendants, and I'd play the trailer for you to show you how they tried to cut all the scenes into making it look like it was a comedy. But it's not. George Clooney somehow has Hawaiian ancestry, and he's in charge of making a decision about some land in Hawaii. It should have been played by like a Hawaiian person. This is the actual kind of, Me Too progressive things where you have a white guy playing a role that should be played by a person of color. But that's not the theme of the movie. The theme of the movie is this.
Dad, Mom was cheating on you.
His wife just recently died, and he finds out that she was cheating on him, and he goes and stalks the man who cheated on her. And this is kind of the, this look and just the whole thing, right? So this is him and his two daughters going to see his wife as she dies in the hospital. Of course, there's the melancholy music playing in the background.
Girls, let me go in for just a quick moment alone first. Are you kidding me? Who are you? The only thing I know for sure is you're a goddamn liar.
And so there's that. His wife's, in a coma, and he is, upset he found out she cheated on him. This is the movie Tomorrowland. I saw this years ago, and again, this is some Disney, it bombed, some Disney George Clooney depressed movie. And this girl's out in the field, and there's this music here. So, it's just this, the melancholy. Like, that's how you would describe George Clooney's effect on people. This is the movie Gravity, which is, this same theme is going to play out in this movie Midnight Sky. In this case, though, George Clooney is the dead character. He's the dead character. Sandra Bullock is hallucinating him. Because she's alone in a crisis situation, he's a comforting figure for her, and she's trying to head back to Earth. Similar type of movie theme here.
Turn out all the lights. Just close your eyes and tune out everybody. There's nobody up here that can hurt you.
just depressed and melancholy. Plus, it's not even original. They're lifting these things from other movies. So in the Midnight Sky movie, George Clooney's hallucinating his daughter. And in Gravity, just for the same thing, it was isolation and all alone. And in Gravity, Sandra Bullock is hallucinating George Clooney because she's in a crisis and that's how she copes. And then George Clooney's co-star in The Descendants, his daughter is Shailene Woodley, who is now, with Aaron Rodgers or whatever. And she was in a movie called Adrift where she hallucinates her boyfriend. They're sailing a boat like across the one of the oceans, like the Pacific, I think, the big one, and they get hit by a storm. The ship gets messed up, and her boyfriend had immediately died. This is a true story, by the way, and she hallucinated her boyfriend throughout, and so this is a theme, a running theme in multiple movies that have some connection to George Clooney, two of them which he's in. This one is like his baby, right? He's directing it. He pitched it to Netflix. It's a George Clooney movie, and it's the most depressing, and it features Anubis. In this movie, George Clooney is the last man alive on Earth. Right? He's in Antarctica, right? Which must be the North Pole because he sees the star Polaris. So that was the South Pole, whatever, right? He's in one of like a frozen desert tundra, and he's trying to save his daughter, who ultimately, was with only 5 other people, but it's just going to be her and her unborn baby and her lover that are eventually going to be saved. Which, of course, I mean, the Adam and Eve aspect of this thing, but that's not how you can't start a population of people with 2 people, right? We can have brothers and sisters marry each other. I mean, the whole Cain and Abel thing. You had 2 guys. Cain killed Abel, right? So, I mean, you can't have only a couple to start a human population. It doesn't work, right? And so the human race has wiped itself out, and it's just, this depressed last story of the human race starring George Melancholy Clooney. So then he finds out there's the little girl. There was this little girl the mother was concerned that she got left behind. It wasn't going to be on the plane with her going to certain death. Right? I mean, the people all know they're getting on the plane. They know that the world is over, that they're going back to families that are dead. The plane isn't going to make it. There's radioactive, I mean, the condition of the world is uninhabitable. They're leaving the only place that is, radiation free. And George Clooney is the only one who's staying behind, right? Because he has no one. Like, he didn't make a connection with his daughter, as you're going to find out later in the film. He was married, and he was so obsessed with his work, and which was critical to finding what becomes sort of an Eden, right? And these are all things that are yet to come in my presentation here, but they're all desperately trying to get out of there, get on these planes. This woman's trying to find her daughter, but someone says, hey, she's already on another plane for some reason. And so he discovers this little girl. She's sleeping with a dog, which is, another reference to Anubis here. So here's her curled up with a dog. There's a lot of Illuminati eye stuff. I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole symbolic aspect of it. So she doesn't say a word. She is mute.
It's a spaceship. Far away. Coming.
And so what this represents is he now has a little girl. He has a terminal illness. And the radiation is slowly creeping its way to Antarctica. Eventually, there's a bunch of birds dying outside. They're all flapping around on the ground when he goes outside because the radiation has reached them, right? And so the world is poisoned. It's uninhabitable. All life has been destroyed. He's dying. He's got like a 7-year-old girl that refuses to speak who can't take care of herself, and she's going to be the sole survivor. And what does he do? Does he kill her, mercifully allow himself to die? And, she has to deal with all that and die alone, whatever it is, right? And so it turns out that she's an hallucination, which, you can kind of figure out through the movie, because they flash back, and he was the guy who discovered this moon around Saturn. So he was this, very, he found a habitable planet or a moon, around Jupiter, I'm sorry. And he's so engrossed with his work, he has this English woman he's dating, and he impregnates her, and she has a baby, but he never meets the baby, his daughter. He never has a relationship with her. And now she's up in space, which you don't find out. Like, you kind of know it's going to go that way. She's up in space, she's pregnant, and he's got to go to another location to try to save her, right? So here is some of the music. They play all these different forms of melancholy music. It's the worst of the worst. Again, like, I just sort of fast forward it through the movie because it's just so depressing. And I knew I was going to make a video about it.
It's the most important star in this.
Right? Just this, he's doing a transfusion right here, talking to this hallucination of his daughter that he never met. And the real one is hurtling back to Earth for a certain death. And he's got to get to an observatory, and he's, in a weakened condition to save his daughter. Not an observatory. I'm in the editing process now. I'm going to come back to this scene because it represents him looking at the North Pole. So he's not in the Antarctic, which I said, because that's the South Pole. He's in the Arctic, and they're viewing the star Polaris. And I'm going to come back to that at the end. And now, I just went and figured I needed to do that because it just, it's part of the story, right? The part of this video, the narration. But they're not going to an observatory. They're going to a place where it has a bigger antenna because his antenna isn't big enough. Typical Clooney. So I forgot to include this scene right after he puts Anubis in the trash and before he starts hallucinating his daughter he's never met. He's poured himself a drink. He's all alone. He's dying. And you can see in the background, these are spots that have been hit by nuclear weapons. And they play this, the melancholy music. And you can see that there's spots here. They're playing this music. And the radiation is expanding in all these places that were hit by nuclear weapons. They're showing America here. But it's red all around the world. And the radiation is slowly, expanding and, connecting and, destroying and killing everything on planet Earth, right? As he, drink up, George, and play this, music. His daughter, played by this English girl, because, his wife was English, is on this, spaceship that they found that this planet is like, in Eden, which is going to come into play later. And it's very, it's inhabitable. And now they're going back to Earth to say, oh, we found an inhabitable planet. And they don't know Earth has been destroyed, and he's got to let them know so they don't,
Pollution or maybe a geomagnetic storm. But none of that could last this long or disrupt both.
And so they have this, it's just depressing. It's the lighting here. This is the guy that she's with and has impregnated her. They're together. And there's 3 other people on the space station. But they're all going to die. So it's just going to be this couple that's left. And I'm not going to cover all the plot holes here. But in terms of NASA and any sort of protocols and military protocols, getting pregnant isn't an option, right? There's 5 people on this spaceship, and they all have responsibilities and work they have to do. There's no diapers. There's no, they haven't built anything there for the possibility of a pregnancy, right? she has responsibilities, communications, and other things. I mean, she has to go out while being pregnant, and they have to go fix the antenna later on, right? So there's all these things, and they would have whatever, they've got all this advanced medicine. This is in the future, and they would have ways of getting rid of aborting the baby because it can't happen, right? And it's just convenient to the plot because of the the way that it's going to play out later on the end of the movie, but it's just because the movie says so, not because it would happen in reality. So there's three storylines going on. There's what's happening in space with his daughter. Then there's the past storyline where he couldn't connect with his daughter. They show a little bit of that. They have a little bit of flashback stuff where he discovers this planet now, and that is now daughter, who he hasn't met her, and she doesn't know who he is, right? She knows who he is, but not that he's just her father. And this hallucination of his daughter going to trying to save her, right? And they they're they're in the North Pole, and they got a snowmobile, and he comes upon this wrecked plane. There's a pack of wolves at the plane, and he fires a gun and scares them off, and he goes in, and there's a guy dying. More depressed, but the guy's over here. I'm not going to show you the guy, but the guy's dying. He's begging for Clooney to kill him, and of course Clooney kills him. And then he finds this sort of I don't know, like a trailer, a place out there where there's some little way station for where he's traveling to. He's got his snow machine or snowmobile or whatever they call them. And him and the girl go in there and decide to spend the night. So it's just a creepy relationship. Like, he's alone with this little girl. He has no skills. He hasn't been a parent, doesn't know how to deal with kids. And just the creepiness of the relationship with looming death, right? And then he wakes up in the middle of the night, and this trailer, this way station, is sinking into the Arctic ice. And his snowmobile falls through the ice while he's on it. He's in this frigid water for some reason, he's in this like freezing water. He's trying to swim for his equipment that, he's doing these infusions to save his life. Not save his life, but prolong his life, but it's sinking fast, and he can't salvage it. But he comes out of the water, and he somehow survives. Like he's in the coldest place in the world. He's just he's soaking wet, and he's got some kind of a coat he puts on, and somehow he survives. And now he has to walk all the way to the bigger antenna because his antenna's too small.
I'm sorry, Lake Hazen. I missed that last transmission.
So finally he ends up talking to his daughter.
Is that mission control?
Lake Hazen, are you receiving this?
So George Clooney hesitates and doesn't tell him that the world has been ruined by nuclear war. Like, the whole point of the movie is for him to tell him that, right? But he hesitates. And so before he can tell him, the space station is pummeled with a piece of ice because they got off course and they had to go through uncharted space. And there's all this, these objects very similar to the movie Gravity. They come along and it's like, the same kind, like they're remaking these various movies. And it pummels the space station and knocks out their comms. And so they got to go fix the comms. And there's another young woman on board, and she ends up dying in a very dramatic, long, overly long death scene. And this is her corpse here. And there's just the dark lighting, and they just play this music. This music is like soul-sucking. And they have these scenes where they've recreated in a 3D way, time they spend with their family. So they go in their rooms. It's like 30 years in the future, and they have these moments where they kind of sort of interact, or they're in these, scenes from their past that have been, video. They have these 3D moments, right? And, the music is just more of the depressed music. It's melancholy music, but it's also sentimental. Like, just just picking through the bones of the past when, humanity was on Earth and it was doing well. Like, it's emotionally manipulative. Like, it's just all this, reminiscence of when good times and, the loving moments after humanity has effed up the Earth and destroyed all life on it. So this guy, the Kyle guy from Friday Night Lights, and he desperately just wants to go home and be with his family. And eventually he makes the choice to go to certain death with another guy who misses his family, leaving the couple alone, right? But he is here by himself with the melancholy music. And he makes a discovery. And so he discovers that Earth and they see that the Earth has been wrecked by nuclear war. And so they're now dealing with the fact they're going back to a planet where there's no people on it, and they just left a planet or a moon that was habitable, right? So then the daughter, George Clooney's daughter that he's never met, contacts him, and he kind of lets her know that, he's her dad. He's sort of, he's famous, and his discovery, she tells him how important he was to her and how big his discoveries were and why she ended up wanting to be an astronaut. But it's just so icky. And there's this exchange.
I'm afraid we didn't do a very good job of looking after the place while you were away.
So she says she just got a visual on Earth. And so that's his response, right?
Are you seeing any new data that might suggest possible safe entry points for us?
No. All survivable areas are underground.
And so we know about that, right? There's these so-called bunkers out there for the so-called elite, right? What I call controllers, who, like the Denver airport has this massive underground city, supposedly. And these people are going to run to that when the Earth is uninhabitable and live like mole people, right? So the other two astronauts have now left, and they're going down to Earth to die because their families are dead. And he's, obviously going to die because he's George Clooney and he's in a movie. So, and so he's got to die, right? And earlier in the movie when, he was first meeting this little girl that was, left behind, she draws a picture of an iris, which she does a very good job for somebody who's 6 or 7, right? And he says, "Oh, is that your name?" Because she's mute. And she said, "Yeah." And you find out the girl on the spaceship is also named Iris. And, going all the way back to when they did this flashback when he's with his lover or his, former lover. And, she's coming to visit somebody and he sees her and he's like, "Is that my daughter in the car?" kind of thing. And she says, "Yeah, why don't you go meet her?" And he won't do it, right? And so you kind of already knew, there's no, anybody with some critical thinking skills knows, and, some idea how films work, and especially George Clooney films, knows that this is going to, be some reveal at the end where the girl he's with is an hallucination because, other than that, it's a horror movie because she's going to be left alone as the last person on Earth as a 7-year-old kid in the Arctic to starve and freeze or, face some horrible death, right? And that his daughter is, he's going to save his daughter that he neglected his whole life because of his obsession with the planet, the moon, the habitable moon, that now she is going to habitate, right?
What you did. You discovered so much up here.
And she's talking about how great he is. And so then she's describing the place to him.
And that light, it makes all the colors explode, everything.
She's talking about what it's like there in his discovery. And then this is the moment, there's the reveal. I'm not going to get into that. But she's talking about how great it is.
First time.
And the imaginary girl disappears, right? Because he's now talking to his real daughter.
I've never seen anything so beautiful.
And so they have this melancholy music, and then he's left all by himself imagining what it's like in this planet. And then the couple, she's pregnant with his baby, and they're going back. You know, he's figured out a way for them to slingshot themselves around Earth to use its gravitational pull. Very similar to what they did in the Mars movie, right? The Martian with Matt Damon. Like, they've just taken from all these other, various movies. And the way it ends, George Clooney is like the God of the Old Testament, right? So he found and created an Eden. He found an Eden for them to go back to. They show her earlier at the place, and it's just beautiful, and it's pristine, and all these things. This is Adam and Eve, and George Clooney has, figured out a way he discovered this Eden, and he, helped them go back to it, right? So humanity can start over in a, like in a biblical way, right? And George Clooney's plays, the Old Testament God in this, right? Like in a movie that he directed, and, is his baby. He cast himself as the God in, the book of Genesis in the Bible, right? So I want to return to that scene where him and his hallucination of his daughter are staring at the star Polaris. It's important. It's funny because it takes like a minute for him to say it's the most important star, and if you're ever lost, you can look at it. And they played this really, I used it earlier in this video just as an example of the melancholy music. But he plays this melancholy music as they're staring at the star, as he's receiving a transfusion for his terminal disease while he's hallucinating a 7-year-old daughter, right? This is some brilliant man who, supposedly is going to save humanity. And I've already done the voiceover talking about death, and, things are going on now, of course, with, the potential for World War III and all these things, which it might be some overlap because, I did this video a couple days ago, and then I didn't get around to editing now, so you're just going to have to, tough it out, right? If I say things a couple, different ways or repeat myself here, that's the reason. So they're staring up at this star. And, let me just play the clips here.
Polaris. You see it?
So I'm going to edit out where she says yes, and there's like 10 or 15 seconds between their responses, right? So I'm going to edit all that out because of, Netflix and copyright stuff. And, there's no reason to drag it on. But it takes like a good minute for this simple exchange.
It's the most important star in the sky. If you ever get lost, it'll help you find your way.
There was like 8 seconds of melancholy music between each of those like interactions where she nods and he says it's the most important star, and it'll help you find your way if you get lost. And this is the North Star that, all the three wise men used to find Jesus. So, there's all this, like George Clooney is claiming divinity here, right? Like this is a movie he directed and, starred in, and he's the guy. This is his project. This is one of his these vanity projects these stars get now from Netflix and Amazon. Tom Hanks, they did a similar movie with him, a robot and a dog, where he's dying. A lot of this sort of stuff, post-apocalyptic, horrible movie on Apple. And there's these long scenes where they have no dialogue and no story. Like it's just, depressed music and, look at the tragedy, look what we've done to the earth kind of thing, right? When they're the ones who are doing it. It's not us. Like we're not about to wage a nuclear war or whatever's going to happen. According to the Whispers of the Brighter World messages that I've read in recent videos, these prophecies and, Adam, ATOM will end this, will ruin this world, and nuclear power is demonic, and all these upheavals are going to have their root in it, right? So I've been, documenting what we believe here in the heartfulness system, or at least some of us. Most of us don't even, most people are like in denial of the prophecies who do heartfulness, right? But this is, supposed to be the beginning of something in like 4 years, and it's likely going to start with some sort of nuclear events, right? And whether, you believe that or not, that's just, my understanding of it in terms of, the spiritual system that I do and the teachings and, all the things that go with it, transmission and cleaning, that's proven the system works for me. But in 3 ways, he's claiming divinity here. And again, there's long segments of this movie that has, it's just filler. Like it's not it's not even really a full-length movie. It's poorly made. But he starts off with Anubis, and he's played Anubis in so many of his movies, like the god of death, the deliverer of the underworld. He's there's the opening scene where he has the Anubis thing going on, and then of course he is the father of the girl who is now pregnant with a daughter, who is like going to repopulate the earth, or this new earth that he discovered, right? Like he found this moon that's habitable, and and just in time, there's an expedition going out there. They find the thing, and when all of humanity is behind them, there's a couple going there in a biblical way in the book of Genesis where there's Adam and Eve. And he's also, in a way, maybe claiming to be the devil in terms of the apple, right? Giving them whatever knowledge. But, it can't work. Like the Old Testament, I've talked about this. And if you're, a person who loves the Bible and loves Christian, you're a Christian and you just love all these things, just think about what I'm saying. You don't have to react. This is just somebody else with a different understanding or opinion. I've talked about how the God in the Old Testament is a demon. It's the way they portray God. It's not a loving God. They portray God as angry, vengeful, and narcissistic, petty, and, oblivious and disconnected. In so many ways, it's just, it's the opposite of God, right? It's like the devil is the central figure, not God. Like what they call God is the devil in the Old Testament, right? And, you can read it for yourself, but, I went through this experience where when I was a kid, there's a synagogue next to our church. So I went to this church called St. Thomas, and I think it was called Beth David Synagogue. And the synagogue had all these hills in front of the main entrance. There was these little hills, and like we'd go to catechism on Saturday, which was a religious teaching at the church, Catholic kids. And there's a lot of Jewish kids in the, Jewish people in the town I grew up in. And they would be going to, whatever their Sabbath is, right? Their Saturday, they worship on Saturday, right? And so we were just there at the same time, and we knew these kids from school, right? We didn't know anything about religions, and really, we were just, there was the kids that we hung out with at school, right? And I remember we'd play like King of the Hill, where, you try to be at the top of the hill and everyone would take you down, right? And we play these games there. But they were like right next to each other. And I, was reading the Bible as a part of my, religious training. I was into God even as a kid in different ways. And I liked the Old Testament better because it had stories, right? The New Testament's very abstract. It's more for adult. It's teachings, it's principles, and it doesn't really hang together as a book in terms of, a timeline and a story of Jesus's life, right? Because of its, being written by all the different various disciples. So it has all these different point of views. St. Paul never even met Jesus. And, he didn't discover God, didn't have that interaction where we went from being Saul to where he became Paul on his trip to Damascus, right? Where he was struck down and, all that stuff. And then he, Saul, why dost thou persecute me? And he had this religious spiritual awakening. And St. Paul was Master Chargy, the third master of the heartfulness system. He had, these past life memories that were confirmed by Babaji, right? He had the memory of this incident, right? So he, and he had a better life where he became, he went to a much higher level in the heartfulness system. But he never met Jesus. So the New Testament is a bunch of different points of view of Jesus and his teachings. And the Old Testament is the old, comes from the Jewish Bible. I forget what they call it, not the whatever it is, right? And so there are two different books that are put together from completely different perspectives, and Jesus transcended his religion, right? So this is where he gets into the kingdom of heaven is within his, probably best teaching, which has been downplayed by the Christian religion. But in the Old Testament, God is this demon, this vengeful, narcissistic demon, right? And this idea that there could be, Adam and Eve had two sons and one of them killed the other, right? Cain killed Abel. And so, that would be it, right? And also with the Noah's Ark, when everyone else died but Noah and his family and their spouses, if you have two kids, if you have a man and a woman, God creates a man and a woman, and they have a boy and a girl, the only way that life can go on is incest, right? And, the brother and sister marry each other. And then you have a lot of, brothers and sisters and cousins marrying each other. And we all know what happens with that little, with a little amount of genetic diversity can't happen, right? Whatever miracles you want to claim, like that's just not the way it happened. In terms of the heartfulness meditation in these, prophecies, Babaji says that people come from a test tube. Like the modern day humans, there's been other races of humans here before. But the past 5,000 years, this group of humans are, were genetically manipulated and probably a slave race. I mean, he doesn't say that, but, I've found all these other theories about that out there. You can look into Lloyd Pye and some of these other people who have, ideas of, there's been some genetic manipulation, the chromosomes being fused. I've covered this in other videos, right? But, there's a complete different understanding of where the human race came from. And it's important, the origin of our species. If we were created as a slave race and it's sloppy genetic work done by some, aggressive alien species or whatever that made slaves so they could, do whatever they did there, right? In Egypt and other places, well, then that's, that's something else to think about. And like all of these things, I don't care whether you believe it or not. This is what I believe. This is my channel. This is what I believe. And you don't need to freak out. Like just, oh my God, he just said that. I got to say something because he's wrong. Okay. I don't, just, I know what you believe and I've read your book, this is what I believe and you can take it or leave it. I don't even, whatever. Right. But George Clooney in this movie has, he gets the New Testament now with this idea of the star Polaris. I went when I was in my second attempt at college. And, I need to talk about those in some future videos because I was such a chucklehead and underachiever. But at some point I stopped filling modes, stopped taking classes that were a part of the modes. You needed all these classes. Like I was going for a degree in psychology and a minor in communications. And I just started taking classes that interested me. So I took a history class with this horrible history teacher with suspenders, and he looked like Santa Claus. I literally went to sleep in every class. I'm like, how can you make history boring? Like I thought history would be interesting, right? And then I took astronomy, or whatever it is. Astronomy, not astrology. They didn't offer astrology. I took astronomy because I was like, oh, I loved being in planetariums and I wanted to learn about the stars and things like this. But the guy who was a teacher was so boring. And he constantly talked about the star Polaris. And he would go, and we were in this sort of like auditorium and everyone was tuned out. No one's listening to him because he couldn't follow the guy. We were all like looking at each other like, oh, this guy's so clueless, right? But anyways, he referenced the star Polaris because it's the only star. If you look at the stars, they rotate. Like if you go out at 7 p.m., let's say it's dark out, and then you go out again at 10 and you go out at 1 a.m., the stars are going to be moving. They're going to be in different locations and disappear, right? But the star Polaris pretty much stays the same. And so that's the guiding star, the North Star. And, it's got New Testament biblical references, right? The birth of, the birth of Jesus. And so what it means in this movie with George Clooney, he's, the god of death in the beginning and from his past work, and then, the apocalypse, and then he claims, God of Eden, the God of the Old Testament, and he's created, at least half of the new, the people that are going to repopulate the earth. He's created Eve, right? And then, he's guided them to this planet, right? And then also with the star Polaris and, the stuff to do with Jesus and the divine birth, right? So he's claiming all these things. Like, look at the arrogance. Look at the balls on this Eminem. There's a comedy bit out there by Louis C.K., and it's about the movie Good Will Hunting, and the scene where Matt Damon goes, "How do you like them apples?" Right? And he talks about how Matt Damon wrote this movie where he's a criminal thug, a Boston Southie, a tough guy, but also like the world's smartest guy, right? Because he wrote the script, and then there's this scene where he goes up to the window and says, "Did you like apples?" There's this guy he was, having a debate with in the bar. And the guy goes, "Yeah." But what if he didn't say that? It's a good comedy bit. So, it's just because he wrote it that way. When you are in control of the way that you portray these narratives, just like we see in the world today, when you have a passive, a completely controlled media and political parties, and everyone just goes along with these scripted narratives, of course, there's real life consequences and events that, wreck the narratives, and then there's people out there with differing points of view. But in this case, George Clooney is in control of this Netflix debacle, and he, casts himself as Anubis and God of the Old Testament, and I guess God of the New Testament as well, because, that's how big his ego is. Anyways, let's this is the narrative. We're going to transition into the narrative that I did earlier. If there's some, confusion here, it's because I had to insert this last piece when I was doing the editing process. So here's the first narrative. So I want to talk about death again. And, I was going to add some things. There's some stuff with Jojo Magoo and Whoopi and, news from the Ukraine, but I'll cover that tomorrow. This will be sort of a continuation of these videos. But, the way that we approach death in our modern day civilization, because we're all dying, right? Like you're just 1 minute closer to dying every second. Like it's 1 second closer to dying than I was before when I just said that, or 10 seconds or whatever it is, right? Because we're all moving to that inevitability. And it's natural to be scared of death because, we have to fight to survive. We have to, if we didn't have a strong urge to eat, for example, and breathe, breathing happens automatically. I've talked about this before in terms of the heartfulness transmission that's given God's love, right? That you can survive without food, 30 days, 40, I don't know what it is. And you can survive without water for 4 or 5 days, again, a much shorter period of time. You can survive without breathing for about 10 minutes, maximum, right? And you can't survive without love for any amount of time. If the love was withdrawn from your body would die. And your love is, your soul and your spiritual energy and the part of you that's divine, right? The part of you that's connected and a part of God in the purest form. We're all a part, even the gross parts, even our, our negative thoughts, all of our grossness, all of our, all the icky stuff that exists in the world, heavy, dense material matter, that's part of God. But the most subtle part of us, the part of us that is, God in a pristine form, once that's removed from you, that's, the feeling of that is love. And once that is removed from you, you die, right? There's a couple of good videos on the Heartfulness YouTube channel that Dodgy talks about how life begins and how, a person dies from a soul perspective, right? From, what happens on to your, spiritual, the five spiritual points in your heart, the earth point, the fire point, the water point, the ether point, and the soul point. And so, when this energy is withdrawn at the time of death and when it's created at the time of birth, right? Very interesting from a spiritual perspective, how your body is manifested in a spiritual way and how life goes into it and life goes out of it, right? But most people talk about how fear is a bad thing, but fear is, a part of life because fear motivates, right? Fear gets you up in the morning, gets you to go out and, do things that you normally wouldn't do if you weren't scared, if you weren't worried, whatever it is, right? So fears can be bad. Certainly they can be bad. And fears run amok, and a fear doesn't feel good. And so it's not like a feeling of love, but it is often necessary to get people moving, to get people motivated, and keep you surviving, right? Keep your physical body going. And so there's a natural fear of death, right? That we want to, keep on moving along. We don't, transitions are hard. We don't really want to face the end of our, the only thing that we know, right? Because you have spiritual experiences and go to places that are in the spiritual realm of existence and leave your body, which helps you immensely when you are. I mean, this is one of the things that heartfulness meditation prepares people for. But in terms of like really being conscious of anything but your body or a world outside of your body, for most people that doesn't happen. And even for real spiritual people, it's only little glimpses, a little deja vu, some dreams, whatever, some feelings you have. But, we wake up, we open our eyes, and we see the physical world around us, and we process time in a linear way, and we want to keep on going, right? We want to enjoy what we're used to enjoying, and we just, we want to survive. But as you get older and you get closer to death, you have moments in your life where, like I said, you just want to go to sleep. You just want to, get away from the world. You just want to go inside, right? You want to, the material world, I mean, it's just, yeah, I'm over it, right? And as you get older and your friends die and your peers and your parents and all these various, layers of the older generation, and now you start, the world is no longer as appealing. You can't enjoy things. Your body doesn't work anymore, right? You can't really, indulge in the physical life like you used to, and you're maybe in, sort of constant pain or constant, poor health, and you're tired. You're just worn out, and, and that's all a good thing because death becomes less scary. You'll start looking forward to it at times, right? You start thinking about it in a way, preparing yourself for this, inevitability, right? And you're starting to make the transition. Your mind starts to go to the spiritual realm, and you're getting ready to make that leap out of your body and back to, the etheric realms of existence, and then, regroup and figure out where you go from there, right? There's a divine process. And that's not the way we handle it. In movies and TV shows and, commercials and everything, death is considered, horror movies, death is considered, the worst possible thing. I mean, you ask most people what they're most scared of, and, and fear of whatever is often fear of death, right? Because if you have a phobia, it feels like you're dying, whether, it might be any kind of a phobia, claustrophobia or arachnophobia. You're worried about the thing killing. You're worried the spider's going to kill you or whatever it is, right? So it's all related to a fear of death, an over hyped fear of death. In a system that celebrates the happily ever after, the happy ending more than, any civilization, death is, our inevitable end is considered bad, evil, and something to be terrified of. And then, of course, people who don't believe in God or some sort of an afterlife or whatever it is, it's even worse, right? And so, people just don't want to end, right? They don't want to stop being them. They don't want to, transition back. And it's just, there's an immaturity there, and it's been accentuated by all of the cultural aspects and the marketing system and just focusing on the materialism, the materiality of planet Earth and enjoyment and sensory stimulation, and not on the bigger picture that we have a soul and our soul has a purpose. And sometime our body's going to die and our soul's going to reclaim our essence. And, it's lent to your physical world. It's lent to your body for a period of time. But it isn't yours. Your soul isn't your body's, right? That's why when people say they sold their soul, it's not accurate because you can't sell your soul, in the way that it's portrayed. I mean, there's ways that you can screw your soul over, or you can get lost or trapped here, and that happens, confused and things, by lives that are led poorly or badly. But in terms of your soul is, like you're just the avatar, you're just a little blip internal experience, your soul is eternal, and there's little blips here and there in physical world or somewhere else, and little time periods that your soul is learning and growing and adapting and finding more about its true essence and its purpose and its goal and heading its way back to the source, right? But in all this, going back to the original point, there's a natural fear of death, right? When you're drowning or there's something that's going to kill you and your flight instincts kick in and you run and you get the adrenaline and all these things. There's natural, a natural healthy fear of dying. That again, over periods of time as you get older, it is not as strong as it once was, right? As you get older, you're now, understanding your inevitable fate more than when you were a young person. But that's the natural aspect, the natural fear. But then there's what we have now, where it's an unnatural fear of death, where people are obsessed and, they're neurotic and it's just a psychological aberration and an obsession with this. And something that no one really wants to think about or talk about, and it's there waiting for us all, right? And that's where we are sort of intersecting with a period of time where there's going to be a huge die-off, where instead of constant population growth, there's going to be a shrinking of our population and a loss of our lifestyle, our habits, our luxuries, our privileges, and things like this. So we have a time where, you think about this George Clooney movie and most movies about the future, and the future is way worse than it is now, right? It's not only just the apocalypse, it's, whatever's happening. The technology might be more advanced, and that's even now, but people are less and less happy, less and less natural, more and more insane. I mean, this is, where we're going culturally and then individually. It's producing worse human beings, weaker human beings, more entitled, and lost the true essence of our life. And we're not, in tune with nature and connected to God and the family and all these things, just getting farther and farther away from our true purpose. And the controllers have their, people I call the controllers have their agenda. But there's divine plan here at place, and it's the end of a yuga, it's an end of a way of life, a civilization, and that's, death in a different way, right? The end of, life as we now know it on planet Earth. So these things are converging, and we're all starting to feel it. Like on a level where animals sense that there's a hurricane coming. I mean, they're putting the information out there, in their way. They're trying to control it, the people who control the system. But then on a more natural way, we're starting to feel the changes upon us, right? And it's not, what's happening right now in the Ukraine or the COVID stuff. It's that there are bigger things coming. They're inevitable, right? And so each one of us has to process that, because transitions are hard. When you go through various phases and you're transitioning to a new phase of your life, it's difficult. That's why teenagers are such a nightmare, right? But then people in their 20s and then, married couples and, having a kid and all these things. Transitions are very difficult. And starting over is really difficult. And that's, I experienced that, I guess it's been, 7 years now since the, divorce process started. And, the end of that period of my life, which was a complete blessing, but it's been brutal, right? In terms of having to start over and, it's all been great, but it just takes all this life energy. You're on a path and you're a part of something, a shared goals and whatever, family stuff. And then you have to just reinvent yourself. And for me, it was when I was in my 50s and I was just worn out. Plus you're worn out by the thing that just has sucked the life out of you. And it gets harder and harder to do that as you get older, starting over. And we're all, in that position now because things are changing. The people that control the system want to reset everything, and the divine forces are resetting things in a different way. And, we're just all, our souls want for us something different than the path that we're on. Most people are going in the wrong direction, away from God. And so, that's where we are. And transitions are, and changing is, hard for people. And even if it's for the good, right? And we resist it. People resist change. I've seen this on every level as a counselor, in my personal life, all these things. my own, dealing with the transitionary aspect of the heartfulness system, and things, giving up things and changing your attitude and the way that you do things. People just like to be in a, they like their ruts, like they want to be in a rut. They want to, have things continue on the way they're going, but that's not possible. I mean, it's not possible even in good times, and these aren't good times. I mean, it's at the end of something, and the end of something that was, negative and bad for all of us, but we're addicted to it. We're 100% dependent on it. And so it's, it's all that. And so now we're entering a new phase, and death is, is upon us in one way or another, whether it's our death, the death of the system, or the massive die-off of people. We're going to see, it hasn't really hit yet, but we're feeling it. Like we all are preparing for it. It's something for us to think about. I'll continue this in other videos as we move forward with this. But now we have, people meditating on World War III. People believing that things are going to twist and turn, and, maybe Russia has some kind of deal with China or whatever it might be. They have some, cards up their sleeves. I'm going to get into this more with Jojo Magoo and some of the stupid things he said. It was all stupid, but some things that stand out. But anyways, we have a spiritual solution, which I talk about quite often, that, we can always connect to God, whatever, the circumstances. It's much easier when we're scared, or we're, upset, or we're shook, or we're rattled, because, those are times that people really are open to change, and they're, they can go to a deeper level because of not being distracted or not feeling, when you're uncomfortable, it's much easier to connect to God, and then you can stick with it. Then you can, form that deeper bond with God. And then when times are better, you can, people always think about God when times are bad, but then when times are better, you can keep that connection strong, the heartfulness meditation I talk about. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting for the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Now have a blessed day and be grateful.